All right, hey everyone. Today we're going to do a brief guided notes on the rights and responsibilities of Georgians as well as voting qualifications. And believe it or not, Georgia has its own Pledge of Allegiance, so we're going to talk about that. All right, let's get started. Here we go. Start off, we're going to do the rights and responsibilities of Georgia citizens. And before we can really talk about that, we need to understand exactly what the difference is between rights and responsibilities. All right, so to start off with, we're first going to talk about rights. A right or liberty is another way to refer to it. Is something a citizen has the freedom to do or be free from that the government cannot interfere with. Okay, so these are things that you are able to do and the government can't stop you. All right. Or these are things the government is not allowed to do to you. We kind of lump all of this under the idea of rights, but truly there are rights and there are liberties. Okay. Now, the Bill of Rights in both Georgia and the federal government's constitution protect basically the same rights. So you can see over on the right side of the screen here, this is the short version of the Bill of Rights in the U.S. Constitution. I want to draw your attention to this one right here. These are the big ones that you often hear us talk about. So that is freedom of speech, press, religion, assembly, and petition. Okay. So basically, you're allowed to kind of say what you want ish. All right. The press is allowed to publish. The press is allowed to publish close to what it wants. Okay. Let me clarify something real quick. These are rights, but there's always limits. Okay, so you have the freedom to do whatever, but there are cases in which you can't do it. Like, for example, with freedom of speech, you can't yell fire in a crowded theater because that would create a dangerous situation, or yell bomb on an airplane. Like, that wouldn't be good. For the press, you can't just go around like publishing lies about people to slander their name. Okay. That is not allowed, even though we do have freedom of the press. All right. And you could go on and on with various different examples for religion, assembly, and petition. Okay. Now, those are rights that are clearly stated in the Constitution. And it's important that you know that we call those explicit rights. They're explicit because they were stated in the Constitution. All right. Now, can the Constitution conceivably contain every single right or liberty that might possibly be out there? And the answer to that is like, no. It was written almost or over 200 years ago. So yeah, there was a lot of things they didn't think about. All right. So there is another set of rights that aren't explicitly stated in the Bill of Rights, so that aren't over here listed specifically. And we call those implied rights, meaning that like nowhere in the Constitution does it say, for example, that you have a right to privacy. But you kind of, in some cases, in a lot of cases, do have a right to privacy. In fact, it's implied by the Fourth Amendment. The Fourth Amendment says freedom from unreasonable search and seizure, and that applies like the founders and the framers of the United States thought that you should be protected in your home, that the government shouldn't be allowed to just come in whenever it wants to, that you should have privacy. Okay. Some of the other implied rights are the right to vote. Nowhere in the Constitution does it say you have the right to vote, but we've kind of, at this point in our history, determined that yeah, you kind of do, with some exceptions. And then the right to travel. And I put this one here because we've actually talked about the violation of this right, and we just didn't say it out loud. And that was when we discussed the convict lease system and other measures that were taken to keep tenant farmers and sharecroppers tied to their land, especially during the Reconstruction and New South era. All right. Okay, so let's dive into, we've talked about rights, and now we're going to talk about responsibilities. Okay, so you have a lot of freedoms, you have a lot of liberties, you have a lot of rights, but all of that doesn't work unless you take your responsibilities as a citizen seriously. So here are some examples, and this is definitely not a complete list, but here are some examples of things that are most people consider to be a responsibility of being a citizen of Georgia and being a citizen of the United States. Um, let's define responsibilities. These are duties that all citizens have. So these are things that you should do, or in some cases are required to do. All right. Some of the required or mandatory responsibilities are things like paying taxes. Like you don't want to pay taxes, but you have to because government costs money. And then they're serving on juries. At the end of the day, nobody wants to give up sometimes weeks, if not months, of their time to go determine the guilt or innocence of a case that you're not directly involved with, more than likely. That being said, the way we have to ensure that justice is applied fairly in this country, that the government is not overstepping its bounds when it comes to criminal proceedings. And look, you also have a responsibility to obey the law even when nobody is looking. All right? Just because there's not a cop sitting there taking your speed with a speed radar gun or whatever doesn't mean you're allowed to go 100 miles an hour. Okay? Other responsibilities, though, these are considered to be voluntary. These are things the government doesn't make you do, but you probably should because it helps everybody out. Number one on that list is voting. And so in a lot of voting is one of those unique areas where it is both a right and a responsibility of citizens. Like, you have a right to vote, but nobody's going to make you. That being said, it is a responsibility. It is something that you should do. You should make informed decisions when you go into the ballot box. Registering for the draft. I think as of right now, only males are required to do that. I could see that changing soon. But that said, you don't have to register for the draft, but you probably should. There are some consequences for not doing it. Volunteering, all right, helping out in your community. Okay, these are things that you don't have to do. Nobody's making you volunteer, but if you want the people around you to be a better place, then you should probably take time to volunteer. Now, since voting is both considered to be a right but also a responsibility, we're going to dive a little deeper into that as it pertains to Georgia. In order to vote, step one is you have to register. Now, there are tons of places you can register. And most people, at least I did when I moved back to Georgia, was I registered at the DMV. But I think you can even register at your local school, okay? But you can't just show up on the day of election and be like, I'm here to vote, without having gone through the registration process. And the registration process is there to ensure that you meet all of the qualifications in order to be able to vote in this state. So we'll talk about this first one. First, you got to be a citizen of the United States. Okay, you could be a naturalized citizen or a natural-born citizen, but you have to be a citizen at the end of the day. You also need to be a legal resident of Georgia. You don't want people from California voting in Georgia's elections and vice versa. Okay, I can't go to Montana and just vote for some random local representative because I don't live there. And that just makes sense. During the registration process, you have to be able to prove that you are a legal resident of Georgia. So usually you bring in like a power bill or something like that. You have to be the right age. Okay. So next on the list is you have to be 17 and a half years of age to register. But by the time the election comes, you have to be at least 18 years old. Okay. So if the upcoming presidential election is on November 3rd. Now, you could register as early for that election as early as May. But if your birthday is on November 4th, you can't vote. But if it's on November 2nd or 3rd, you can. Okay. So again, there's a distinction here. You got to be at least 17 and a half years of age to register, because registering takes a little bit of time. But by the time the election rolls around, you need to be at least 18 years old. And then the last requirement is you can't be serving a sentence for conviction of a felony involving moral turpitude. So this includes both being in jail, but also being on probation. And just to show you that this is all real stuff, I went in and pulled in my own voter registration here. So this is straight from the Georgia Secretary of State's website, and it just has all those same requirements I read off to you. And this is when you log into the Secretary of State's website. These are the qualifications or this is what you're going to end up seeing. So if you pull up the notes, you can see part of my address. But you can also see where I vote. So Ivy Creek Elementary School, which is just down the road. And it tells you who your elected officials are. And once you get close to an actual election, you can see sample copies of the ballot so you can prepare and study for that election. Okay. Last but not least, the Georgia Pledge of Allegiance. I say it like that because guess who made the Georgia Pledge of Allegiance a thing? Eugene Talmadge. Remember him? Mean Gene Talmadge. Signed a joint resolution of the General Assembly in 1935 to create the pledge. And it's really short. It says, I pledge allegiance to the Georgia flag and to the principles for which it stands. Wisdom, justice, and moderation. Now those three words are in bold, and they are in bold for a reason. You will see them again on the test, okay? These words also appear throughout all the different icons and stuff like that we use in Georgia. In particular, the Great Seal of the state of Georgia. So the seal gets stamped on every bill that it becomes a law. And you can see wrapped around the columns of the arch here, wisdom, justice, and moderation. Okay, that about does it. Let's talk about today's assignment. So you need to define what is a right and a responsibility. For the rights, you need to be able to give me 3 examples. One of explicit rights, so these are rights that are clearly stated in the Constitution, things like freedom of press, religion, assembly, petition, and then implicit rights. Okay. Over here for responsibilities, give me 3 examples of things that are mandatory responsibilities, so things the government makes you do, and 3 examples of voluntary responsibilities, things you don't have to do, but you should. Then down here, need to list 3 things you need to be in order. Sorry, let me say that again. List 3 things you need to be in order to register to vote. So what are 3 of the basic qualifications in order to vote in Georgia? And then finally, list the 3 principles of the Georgia Pledge of Allegiance. All right. Once you're done, just submit the whole notes package, and I'll go ahead and take a look at that. That about does it. If you have any questions, come to office hours on Thursday, or send me an email or contact me via Google Classroom, and we'll try to work something out. All right. Y'all have a good day.